The Imperials versus the Stormcloaks. For the past 13 years, ever since Skyrim came out back in 2011 on November 11th, there's been an entire conflict whether or not people should be joining the Stormcloaks, should be joining the Imperial Legion, or should just say neither because it doesn't matter either way because there's literally a million different things to do in this godforsaken game. If you include mods, DLC, and literally everything else in between, and if you talk to literally everybody else in the entirety of the game. So basically, I don't want to join either one of them. But with the 13th anniversary of Skyrim just around the corner, I thought I'd give my 2 cents and my opinions before Todd Howard decided to add this game for the PlayStation 6 and the Xbox Series Supreme X Deluxe. Starting off with the Stormcloaks, they're basically a rebellion who want to worship Talos. Who is Talos? He is a dude who was literally born in Skyrim, learned how to shout like dragons, was an artist of war, conquered his way throughout the entirety of Tamriel, and founded the Cyrodiilic Empire, and was basically the reason why Cyrodiil exists today and why the Imperial Legion is a thing. Throughout the entirety of Talos' lifetime, he basically went around the entirety of the globe, taking over every single country through various means until he finally got to the Somerset Isles, where he threatened the entirety of the Somerset Isles and all of High Elf kind with a giant-ass transformer by the name of Numidium. Basically, after everything he had ever done throughout the entirety of this world, he was ascended to godhood, and the High Elves didn't like that because the High Elves didn't like that one time where he pulled a transformer out of a mountain and he decided to threaten all the Somerset Isles with, "Come on, bitch, show me what you got." Basically, after everything that he ever did, Talos then becomes a god, ascends to godhood, becomes the ninth divine, and the elves, some hundreds upon hundreds of years later in the Fourth Era, decide to go to war with the Empire, and they have to issue a peace treaty called the White Gold Concordiant because they basically ended up in a tie. With the Empire basically having little to no resources, and with the Aldmeri Dominion not having their main weapon to use against the Empire, they basically say, okay, we'll give up the war if you let us knock off Talos off the Nine Divine Charter. The Empire reluctantly agrees, and a lot of people are very mad at this because a lot of Nords really put their time and effort into fighting against the Aldmeri Dominion because, again, Nords do not like High Elves. Ulfric Stormcloak, who is essentially the leader of the rebellion, doesn't like the idea that they basically lost their right to worship Talos, faces off against his brother, uses the Thu'um, and everybody's kind of mad about that because the Thu'um isn't supposed to be used to take over your brother's throne, and he becomes the leader of the Stormcloak rebellion, and the Civil War begins. Now, the main issue with this fact is not just how Ulfric killed his brother, but it's exactly what context of what happened. According to Ulfric, he used the power of the Thu'um to shout Teorg to the ground and then finish him off with a sword in front of the entire court. Others, Teorg included, say that he was shouted to pieces by Ulfric's Thu'um. Whenever you find Teorg in Sovereign Guard, it's kind of a messed up kind of thing, I'm not going to lie to you. So while some of the older Nord folk will talk about how, oh, Ulfric Stormcloak was a brave and powerful warrior who fought his brother in one-on-one combat, used the Thu'um, and thus won the 1v1 matchup against his brother. Rightfully, he should be king. Other people say, yeah, he used the power of the Thu'um to knock his brother down and basically stabbed him without putting up a fair fight. That is basically murder in the eyes of all of us. So, as you can tell, there's a lot of contention on whether or not Ulfric is the rightful king because he abused the power of the Thu'um, he knocked his brother down, he fought dirty, and a lot of other people think that he was noble for doing that because the power of the Thu'um is only one who has studied the ways of the dragon, and only a true Nord can actually have access to. Meanwhile, on the opposite side, we have the Imperial Legion. Basically, they are created from the Cyrodiilic Empire that Talos created, and the Imperial Legion basically just wants to keep the peace between everybody so they can fight the Aldmeri Dominion and the Thalmor later on down the line if they have to, and having a separated Skyrim is not going to help anybody. Yeah, and I know that's a pretty simplistic explanation, but that's as simplistic as you can get. We have one side who's fighting for peace throughout the entirety of Skyrim so everybody can just get along and fight the Thalmor later, and another side who just wants the entirety of Skyrim to belong to the Nords and who want to freely worship their god that they've been worshiping for the past several hundred years. Unfortunately for the people who want to support the Stormcloaks, the Empire is going to win this whether or not anybody likes it because more reinforcements are going to be coming from Cyrodiil to Skyrim. The only reason why they haven't made it yet was because that all of the border entries have been blocked off, and a bunch of people are just waiting for the Imperial Legion reinforcements to come from Cyrodiil so they can basically win the war. Meanwhile, alongside the eventual reinforcements of legionnaires that are going to be coming up from Cyrodiil, we already have General Tullius. Over the course of the past several months that he's already been in Skyrim, he's already outmaneuvered, outflanked, and basically done everything in his power to ensure that Ulfric Stormcloak has no way of actually beating the Legion while in Skyrim. General Tullius has done such an amazing job that he's accomplished more in the past couple of months than other people have accomplished over the course of the entire lifetime of the rebellion itself. Even getting to the point where at the very beginning of the game, General Tullius has Ulfric Stormcloak in custody, ready to execute him at Helgen with no trial, no anything, to ensure that the war is ended immediately right off the bat. And even on the off chance that the Empire actually ends up getting defeated by the Stormcloak Rebellion and General Tullius dies, there's still an entire legion of legionnaires just sitting in Cyrodiil, waiting for all the roads to clear up and for all the rubble and all the debris to be cleared up so they can invade Skyrim anyway, which won't take more than maybe a couple of months, if not maybe a year. So the entirety of the rebellion would be quelled, whether they liked it or not. So at the end of the day, there's only two options. Either A, the Empire wins, they take out the Stormcloaks, they take out Ulfric Stormcloak, and they have an entire army of Nords ready to fight against the Aldari Dominion in case they are ready for round two. Or B, the Stormcloak Rebellion wins, they take out the entirety of the Empire in Skyrim, and they just have to wait a couple of months until the Legionnaires go through the entirety of Cyrodiil into Skyrim, take out everybody since they have fresh resources, fresh equipment, fresh troops ready to fight with brand new armor and brand new weapons, going up against an entire rebellion whose forces are already withered and tired from fighting in a previous war just a couple of months prior. Either way, it doesn't look good for anybody, and I highly doubt the Stormcloak Rebellion would last a couple of more months in either situation. Either way, that's just my opinion on the subject, so I'll see you later. So far, I've already made two videos about this subject. I made a video on the Great War itself and how everything happened and how everything went down, and I made a video about the Stormcloaks and how they were perceived as the bad guys, but in actuality, were they actually wrong? So today I'm going to make a video about the Empire, and I'm going to make this entire thing about all of them. So without further ado, I would like to say, here we go. If we're going to talk about the Great War and exactly how it started, we first have to talk about the reason why the Great War started in the first place, and that was because of Tiber Septim, also known as Scion of the Emperors, King of the Earth and Sky, Lord of Shining Hosts, Protector of Oathmen, Femen, and Yeomen, etc., etc., etc. Basically, the entirety of this story revolves around Tiber Septim, his conquering of the entirety of Tamriel, unification of Tamriel, creation of the Cyrodiilic Empire, and him descending to godhood and becoming the Ninth Divine. Talos had effectively started his entire journey while being a general under the command of the King of Falkreath in the Second Era. After his death, he effectively chose to unify the entirety of Tamriel under one banner, that being the Cyrodiilic Empire, and he did so by using his strategic military mind, effectively using the power of the Thu'um, using different variations of magic, and also on top of that, using a giant robot hidden inside of a mountain, so he could threaten to erase the entirety of the High Elf race as we know it, because, for shiggles. In just over a couple of years, Talos and the King of Falkreath took over the entirety of the western side of Cyrodiil, they took over the Imperial City, Talos himself took over the entirety of Hammerfell, turned Morrowind into his own private breeding ground because he accidentally got somebody pregnant and, got the abortion immediately because he didn't want to screw with his legitimate heir, but that's a story for another day. Acquired the Numinium from Vivek, and then basically walked over to the Somerset Isles, threatening to exterminate their entire race if they didn't hand over everything that they had and didn't subjugate themselves to his rule. And upon conquering the Somerset Isles and thus conquering the entirety of Tamriel, he declared that a new age should begin. Thus the Third Age started, and Tamriel began with their new Cyrodiilic Empire, in which Tiber Septim ruled for 38 years before ascending himself to godhood and becoming the Ninth Divine, known as Talos. Needless to say, the High Elves were not exactly happy about the fact that Talos had threatened to destroy their entire island, their entire culture, and their entire race, and also not exactly happy about the fact that this guy who did all that had just descended into godhood and become the ninth divine, and was effectively the god of all mankind when they thought of themselves as the superior culture and the superior race. So obviously they had a problem. But everything would come to a head as the Great War would begin in Tamriel in 171 of the Fourth Era, and things got a little freaking complicated. During the time of 433 of the Third Era, Martin Septim, also known as the last Septim of the Septim bloodline, would fuse himself together and become the avatar of Akatosh, and became an enormous dragon wreathed in flame, and destroyed Dagon's physical body, thus ending the Oblivion Crisis and beginning the Fourth Era. Now, there's a big time jump here, so you better strap in, because in between the end of the Oblivion Crisis and the crowning of Titus Mende II at around 168 of the Fourth Era, a lot of stuff had changed throughout the entirety of the Empire. Valenwood and elsewhere were gone, succeeded by the Thalmor. The Black Marsh had been completely lost to Imperial rule since the Oblivion Crisis ended. Morrowind never fully recovered from the eruption of the Red Mountain, which laid waste to literally everything throughout the entirety of Morrowind, and the entirety of Hammerfell was plagued with infighting between crowns and forebears, with the only three nations actually being prosperous and peaceful being High Rock, Cyrodiil, and the realm of Skyrim. But in 171 of the Fourth Era, everything changed and everything went straight downhill. The Aldmeri Dominion rolled up into Cyrodiil, threatening a bunch of demands, including massive amounts of gold, tribute, dismantling the entirety of the Blades, moving their asses out of Hammerfell, and allowing them to take over the entirety of that country. And they effectively said no, which then resulted in them unloading a cart filled to the brim with the heads of every Blades operative in the entirety of every area where the Aldmeri Dominion had control over, which then resulted in the Aldmeri Dominion invading the entirety of Cyrodiil and taking over the Imperial City in just over a year. The Aldmeri Dominion, of course, being the cheating little bastards that they are, used a Zaedric artifact called the Orb of Vermina to effectively spy on literally everybody that they could at any given time, because that's how they operated. They used the orb to spy on General Tullius, they used the orb to spy on the Blades, on literally everybody that they could imagine, so they could figure out every battle plan, every strategy, and actively navigate themselves to go around those strategies so they could effectively negate any strategy that they would come across that would effectively halt their progress. It wouldn't be until a couple of years into the war that the forgotten hero from Elder Scrolls Legends, the mobile game, stole the Orb of Vermina and halted the progress of the Aldmeri Dominion, which allowed General Tullius to take over the Imperial City and thus inviting the White Gold Concordiant into play. In short, the Aldmeri Dominion would receive the entire southern section of Hammerfell. All the Blades would be dismantled, they would be allowed to have free access to all provinces, and there would be a ban on Talos worship throughout the entirety of Tamriel, thus reverting the 9 divines to the 8 divines, just like it was back during the Second Era. So the Aldmeri Dominion basically got everything they wanted, the Empire practically got nothing, and 25 years later a civil war would break out over the worship of Talos, and the Stormcloaks would fight against the Imperial Legion, and everything would very much go downhill from there. The Empire knows that they are going to have to fight the Aldmeri Dominion sometime in the future. That is just a fact. General Tullius knows that he needs to have the entirety of Skyrim unified to fight against the Aldmeri Dominion, and he knows that if they are not unified in every way, shape, and form, they're not going to stand a chance, and that's a big, big problem. Without a completely unified Skyrim and without a completely unified Empire, there is no way that they're going to be able to fight against the Aldmeri Dominion sometime in the future, whenever the actual Second Great War happens against the Aldmeri Dominion. And considering that they have entire control over the southern section of Hammerfell, the entirety of the war will be over very, very fast, or it'll be a long outstretched war that'll probably last even longer than the previous. So, in conclusion, like I've said throughout the entirety of these 3 videos, this entire subject is extremely complicated on multiple fronts, and I can see every reason as to why. In one hand, you have the reasoning of the actual Stormcloaks themselves. They have been worshipping Talos for well over 600 years. They want their independence, they want to be able to live for themselves, and they want to worship Talos by their own means without the Thalmor and without the Aldmeri Dominion basically breathing down their necks and murdering people just for simply worshipping one of the 9 divines. Not to mention the fact that there are many Nords throughout the entirety of Skyrim who think that the Imperial Legion and that the Empire in general are just weak because they are simply allowing Thalmor agents to walk across the entirety of Skyrim and murder whoever they want, basically for their own amusement or for the fact that they are worshiping a god that they don't like. And that since the Empire really doesn't have any desire to stop them from actually doing this, there's no point in actually expecting the Empire to really care about the Nord people or really to care about the fact that the Thalmor are stepping over everybody and wanting to kill everybody that they want to for their own amusement. Meanwhile, on the Imperial side, the entire job is basically to strengthen themselves and to enforce their ranks so they can fight against the Aldmeri Dominion later on down the line whenever they have an actual unified force to fight against the Aldmeri Dominion and to fight against Thalmor. And without a unified front to actually fight against the Aldmeri Dominion, there's really no point in fighting them, because if they can't fight them with a unified front, then there's no point in actually doing anything about it, and they'll just allow the Aldmeri Dominion to conquer literally everything that they want to, and to destroy everything throughout the entirety of Tamriel, and take it over just like Talos once did back in the day. The Aldmeri Dominion basically doesn't care about the rights of anybody. They step over everyone, and the Empire can't do anything without risking a war with them, especially during a civil war, which would be extremely complicated and very detrimental to the cause of the Empire, and very detrimental to everybody throughout the entirety of the realms, especially Skyrim. So yeah, even though I can see the reasoning behind both factions, realistically it's always going to be up to Bethesda, and it's going to be up to Elder Scrolls 6 to tell us where exactly this is going to go and how this is going to play out for everybody. So until then, I guess I'll talk to you later. Maybe Elder Scrolls 6 will come out in the next 5 years. I have no idea. Until then, see ya. When it comes to Elder Scrolls 5 Skyrim, there's a lot to talk about when it comes to the Civil War. I made a video earlier this month about how the Civil War was completely non-beneficial to the entirety of the Empire or to the entirety of Tamriel, since they were about to be fighting the Thalmor later on down the line, and they needed the entirety of Skyrim and the entirety of Tamriel to band together in case they had to have a full-out brawl. So today, I want to talk about the Stormcloaks in particular, and I want to talk about why they were in the right when it came to them fighting for their own people and why they fought in the war to begin with, and how the Stormcloaks should be commended for fighting for their own honor, fighting for their own right to practice their religion, and fighting against the Thalmor themselves. So today, let's talk about the obvious. Here we go. So first, we're going to talk about the obvious reason why the Civil War broke out: the worship of Talos. As you knew from my previous video, if you actually watched it, Talos is a god of the Nine Divines, and he was worshipped by the members of Skyrim. He was born in Skyrim, he fought throughout the entirety of his lifetime, ruled the entirety of Tamriel through the Cyrodiilic Empire, which he created after he conquered basically the entirety of the world. And upon Talos' death, and after creating the Cyrodiilic Empire, conquering the entirety of the world, and basically being known as one of the most powerful individuals of all time, and becoming the Dragon Lord of Cyrodiil, he effectively became one of the Nine Divines, and the High Elves didn't really like that, considering that they were the last few individuals that Talos threatened to conquer with a super weapon that he found in the depths of a volcano. This angered the High Elves to such an extreme degree that they have been fighting to basically get Talos knocked off the Nine Divines Charter for well over thousands upon thousands of years, but they never got anywhere because they never had the ability to actually knock him off the Nine Divines. But considering the fact that he became one of the Nine Divines worshipped by the people of the Cyrodiilic Empire, which he founded, and that the High Elves were a part of, there was realistically no chance that they were ever going to get him knocked off the Nine Divines roster. Now, the next thing we have to talk about whenever it comes to why the Nords of Skyrim want to fight against the Empire is the Great War itself and what exactly happened before everything went downhill. So, in this story, the Thalmor, who are actually the Aldmeri Dominion, but I'm just going to call them the Thalmor for my own sake of mind, basically wanted to make their own demands. Whenever Titus Mende II ascended to the throne and inherited a weakened empire, the glory days of the Septums were a distant memory. Valenwood and elsewhere were already taken over by the Thalmor. The Black Marsh had been lost by Imperial rule since the aftermath of the Oblivion Crisis. Morrowind never fully recovered from the eruption of the Red Mountain, and everything was basically going down shit creek without a paddle. With this weakened empire in mind, on the 30th of Frostfall at about 171 in the Fourth Era, the Aldmeri Dominion sent an ambassador to the Imperial City with a gift in a covered cart, and an ultimatum for the new emperor. A long list of demands, basically including staggering tributes, disbandment of the Blades, outlawing the worship of Talos, ceding large sections of Hammerfell to the Dominion, and they basically made massive demands knowing that the Cyrodiilic Empire wouldn't be able to fight them on their terms. They denied this request, and in return, they uplifted the cart, and the heads of literally hundreds of different Blades members from the Somerset Isles and Valenwood spilled out onto the floor for everybody to witness. They basically murdered every single Blades member throughout the entirety of the Elven-controlled lands, and it was not a pretty sight for anybody, and war erupted. Now, throughout this entire war that lasted for 4 years, the Thalmor were in possession of a Daedric artifact called the Orb of Vermina, which was basically a fancy-ass Palantir that would allow you to see literally everything that was going on throughout the entirety of Tamriel. They used it to look through the entirety of the Imperial lines, find generals, spy on them, find the Emperor, spy on him, and basically overcome the forces of the Imperial Legion or the Cyrodiilic Empire by spying on everyone and everything before the Forgotten Hero in Elder Scrolls Legends took the Orb of Vermina away from the Thalmor, and they were left without a spying device, and they effectively gave up the war. Now, here is where the White Gold Concordant comes into play. The White Gold Concordant effectively was very unfavorable to the Empire, and they only won the ability to make this treaty after the Battle of the Red Ring, which absolutely decimated the Aldari Dominion or the Thalmor armies in Cyrodiil and allowed them to take over Cyrodiil once again. And they decided to negotiate a peace treaty so they wouldn't have to be able to fight them again. Now, for those of you who were interested, there were main 3 terms that the White Gold Concordant basically awarded the Thalmor. A large portion of the southern Hammerfell would be given to the Dominion, Talos worship would be banned from the Empire, and the Blades would effectively be disbanded, even though they basically killed all the Blades anyway, with the exception of Delphine and whatever his name was. So the Thalmor basically lost their ability to demand gold and got everything else instead. So, good for the Thalmor. And this is where we get to Skyrim and the worship of Talos. The worship of Talos was basically a common practice throughout the entirety of Skyrim. Literally everybody worshipped Talos in Skyrim. All the Nords worshipped Talos. He was basically the main god of Skyrim during the time of which the Empire was created, all the way through the White Gold Concordant, where it was still legal to worship him. And one of these individuals who detested the Empire, who detested the idea of the banning of the worship of Talos, and who fought in the Great War actively against the Aldari Dominion and the Thalmor, was Ulfric Stormcloak. Ulfric Stormcloak fought in the entirety of the Great War against Thalmor, alongside Galmer Stonefist and Legate Ricky, who you find in Solitude as you join the Imperial Legion for the first time. Throughout some parts of the Great War, Ulfric Stormcloak was captured, he was tortured for information, he was interrogated, and there was some little information in a dossier in the Thalmor embassy that says Ulfric was allowed to escape, but there's not really a lot of information aside from that one note. Sometime after the Great War, however, Ulfric Stormcloak marched a crap ton of his men onto the Reach so he could take back the entirety of the Reach from the Bretons, known as the Reachmen. Ulfric was basically told that if he took over the Reach, he would be allowed to worship Talos freely in Markarth again. Ulfric agreed and marched his militia to the gates of Markarth and retook the city, supposedly using the power of the Thu'um. But as soon as the Imperial Legion showed up to reinstate law, Ulfric allegedly refused to give them entry into the city, thinking that he would be able to worship Talos freely, but they told him, no, you can't do that, because if you worship Talos freely in this city, then the Thalmor are going to be mad, and they might show up with an even bigger army to take over and kick all of our asses all over again. Ulfric and his men were then captured, were scapegoated into thinking that this was a small rebellion, were imprisoned, and Ulfric had basically hated the Empire ever since that day, so he basically just detested everybody that associated with the Empire, considering that the worship of Talos was banned and he was imprisoned for taking over Markarth after it was already taken over by the Reachmen. During this entire time, Ulfric becomes the Jarl of Windhelm, and after the death of High King Istold, the Moot convened to elect a new king, and Ulfric continually spoke about Skyrim's independence in terms of just shy of treason, Eventually, the Moot just decided to make Tjorg the High King of Skyrim. And I know I said they were brothers. I'm sorry, I thought they were. That's my bad. This is where the magic happens. This is just directly before the Civil War in Skyrim. Ulfric thinks that the Empire has made Skyrim weak, and the entirety of the Empire is now weakened by the Aldari Dominion and the Thalmor being able to go around killing whoever they want because they worship Talos. Ulfric Stormcloak goes to Solitude, challenges King Tjorg to single combat the old Nord way, uses the Thum to knock him off his feet, and then stabs him in the chest with a sword. And everybody thinks that he's a murderer because he used the power of the Thum to win this battle and didn't fight fairly. Ulfric Stormcloak ends up successfully not being captured by the Imperial Legion at this time and runs back over to Windhelm so he can declare himself as the new High King because he challenged King Tjorg in single combat. General Tullius, however, thinks that this is murder, and he takes on Ulfric Stormcloak in a giant-ass war, and a couple of months into the war, they ambush him at Darkwater Crossing, and they manage to successfully get him to Helgen, where he faces execution. And right there and then is where the game Elder Scrolls V Skyrim begins, and where I have to go into a deep detail about everything that I think of the situation at hand. So, yeah, effectively that's the entire plot of the story. The Thalmor were basically salty because a mortal man ascended to godhood who threatened their entire race. They planned for hundreds, if not maybe over 1,000 years, to make his worship illegal, and the entirety of the Nordic people basically suffered because of it. And throughout the entirety of this time, nobody really wanted to stop the worship of Talos except for the Thalmor, and they got what they wanted in the end, so now the weakened empire has to secede to their demands, or else they threaten to go to war with them. So looking at it through the scope of, oh hey, the entirety of the empire is basically telling us to not worship our god anymore because a different empire basically told them to make it illegal, a lot of people would reasonably be pissed, and the empire doesn't do anything to stop the Thalmor from going around murdering hundreds, if not thousands of people who are secretly worshiping Talos. So I kind of get it. I'm not going to lie. But either way, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, comment with your thoughts and opinions and all that stuff. And I will see you later.